I'm really glad to be among you to discuss one of the topic that is very important to me, and I hope I can give you the insight of why it's so important that we look at addressing drivers of deforestation. So recently there was a study published in Science that showed that from 2000 to 2015, we have not managed to reduce deforestation. And this is despite efforts under the Climate Change Convention to try to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So if we look at the different drivers, definitely in Latin America and Asia, it's commodity-driven deforestation, while in Africa, it's more smallholder farming that drives deforestation. So definitely, we still have some work to do to understand well drivers of deforestation to be able to also find solutions and address them. So in terms of development, as theory says that as development proceeds, forest cover shrinks, so we lose forest, and as deforestation take most of the forest estates, then at some point society start valuing forest again, and we have some forest regrowth. So it is expected that in developing countries, deforestation will go on. But so, as I will show you, the role of forests is so important that it's important that we find ways to change this curve so that it doesn't go too low. So one of the important and main impacts of deforestation is as a source of greenhouse gas emission. So if you look from 1960, land use change was about 43% of the total emission annually. And now it's around, in the last decade, it's around 13%. So forests play a big role as they are cut down. Trees are burned or they decompose, and all the carbon that it's held in the trees goes up to the atmosphere and contributes to climate change. But this relationship goes two ways. So forests that are standing, existing forests, are a very important sink, as well as forests that are regrowing. So in the tropics, there's a large emissions, but there's also a large sink that come from these existing forests. We can think of the Amazon basin, the Congo basin, or forests in Southeast Asia. So one other effect of deforestation, and this is really new research. I think that people that work in forest ecosystem notice that there's an effect on the water cycle, but more and more research are coming out recently to show this important role of forests for the water cycle. The role is local or regional, so when we cut forests, there is this moderating effect of the trees disappear. So there's studies that show big contrast in temperature between the forest land and the alternative land use like crops. So it could reach in Indonesia to 10 Celsius degree in difference. So this is the effect of shade and also the effect of transpiration by trees that remove energy from the surrounding. And what we find also in terms of rainfall is that trees act like a pump that will recycle water and getting back to the atmosphere, contributing to increased precipitation and more stable precipitation. So as we are feeling more the effect of climate change, forests can play an important role in water cycling. So, yes, one interesting point comparison is that one single tree was transpires daily as a cooling effect that equivalent to 2 domestic air conditioner for a day. So this was an evaluation presented recently by a researcher from Yale. So we've seen in terms of emission, we've seen in terms of water cycling, these are more ecosystem functions, but forests also provide a whole suite of products. So here's an example of products which is very important in sub-Saharan Africa is for wood energy. So a lot of the energy that people use for cooking in sub-Saharan Africa come from forests. So you see Zambia has about 75 to 90% of its population depending on wood fuel or charcoal for cooking. So not only that, but forests are important source of timber, diversified food source, provide medicine, and when there's a shock, a drought, it also acts as safety net for people in rural area. So definitely forests are important for sustainable development. So they play a key role in terms of ecosystem function and in terms of products that they provide. One of the major challenges that we are facing is that population is growing, and with income growth also there's more pressure on forest ecosystem around the world. So globally the demand for food is expected to double by 2050. And in sub-Saharan Africa, the demand will even grow more. Just for major cereal, it's expected to triple to 2050. So definitely this will put more pressure on forest land. And it's expected that deforestation will keep going. But the question is like, how can we produce more food and keep using those products that are so important to people, including wood fuel, and prevent environmental degradation, so still maintaining forest ecosystem and sustain the ecosystem function that they produce. So I will bring evidence for Zambia. So most of my research right now focus on Zambia. Zambia is a country located in the southern Africa region. It's also in the Myombo woodland area. Myombo woodland is a seasonally dry woodland that is very important for the carbon cycle and also for the livelihood of people in the area. So these woodlands are used to human activity in the sense that they are resilient to some extraction and use. They are also resilient to fire. The deforestation in Zambia and the pressure in these Myombo woodland has been increasing. So from 2000 to 2010 and to the next period, we see quite some significant increase in deforestation rate for the country. So one of the questions that we are addressing with Chris Barrett in economics, in applied economics and management, and other researchers in Zambia and at Michigan State University, we are looking at does smallholder maize intensification reduce deforestation? So one of the main approach that has been used by the Zambia government to improve rural income and improve food security has been to provide farmers with agricultural input subsidy. This subsidy is specifically for improved seed and inorganic fertilizer. So this program has been taking place for more than 15 years now. So this is an occasion to really look at what's the impact of this program on deforestation. So it's the subsidy program is quite large. It's about 30% of the budget for the Ministry of Agriculture. And just to give you a bit of context of the importance of maize, maize is quite significant. It's the main staple crop in Zambia. People eat it every day. And it's 99% of farm by smallholder cultivate maize. 94% of the crop area in Zambia is maize. So it's really important crop and important for food security in the country. So if we look at theory, what does it tell us about the agriculture intensification and deforestation? Well, we have the Borlaug hypothesis that tells us that as we increase yields, the crop price will go down, and this will have a land sparing effect. So we're going to save forest land. But there's another theory that has been called the Javon hypothesis that says that anything that raises income from agricultural production, including higher yield, will actually incentivize deforestation. So it's not clear from the theoretical point of view what can happen when we improve productivity of the land. So it's important to actually go to empirical evidence. But then when we look at what's available in terms of empirical studies, it's surprisingly very limited. So this is the contribution of this research for Zambia. And so we took a different approach using a method that's called small area estimation, which allow us to use very detailed agricultural survey that happens in some sampled area. So we use the Rural Agricultural Livelihood Survey that exists in Zambia for 2012 and 2015, so for those locations. So surveyor enumerators that work with farmers, this in total, it's about 8,000 farmers per year. So 16,000 farmers. And the enumerators spend 6-7 hours with each farmer. So we have very detailed information of their agricultural practices. And some information that we have is about the use of inorganic fertilizer and of improved maize seeds. So the work of small area estimation is to use also a population census, or a census that is representative of the whole country, of the whole area, and find matching covariates between the census that represent all the location and those that are surveyed in sampled area. And then with the survey data, we build a model with the matching covariates that predict inorganic fertilizer and improved seed. So then with the population census, we replace in the model using the matching covariates from the census, and we predict inorganic fertilizer and improved seed for all locations. So we compare different models. The best performing models was a machine learning approach, random forest model that has had the best predictive performance. So from the sampled area where we had data with the series of covariates, about 60, we were able to predict the density, the application rate per ward, which is the lowest administrative level in Zambia. So there is 1,400 wards in the country. So it really gives us a very highly spatially disaggregated information of the use of fertilizer and improved seed in Zambia. So then we went and looked at using global data for Zambia. We use annual forest cover loss from a global product and evaluated it for all the wards in the country. And then we use regression model to look at the role of the effect of fertilizer, inorganic fertilizer use and improved seed use on forest cover loss, while also controlling for important geospatial variables, including elevation, forest cover in 2000, distance to road, so a whole suite of variables that are important to influence deforestation. So some of the results from this analysis, one of them is definitely strong and consistent is the role of improved seed that reduce forest cover loss. So there's the negative effect of improved seed use on forest cover loss, and it's significant and consistently significant. We also have a negative association between the interaction between improved seed and fertilizer and forest cover loss. So when they are used together, improved seed and fertilizer, they reduce deforestation. Also, we found that fertilizer on maize has a positive effect on forest cover loss. So it's associated with higher deforestation when it's used alone. When we use the interaction, the interaction with fertilizer and cation exchange capacity, the effect is positive on forest cover loss. So the interaction between fertilizer and cation exchange capacity increase forest cover, or is associated with the increase for deforestation, and fertilizer by itself become not significant. So what is cation exchange capacity? Well, it's very much correlated with pH. In our data set, the correlation was 0.85. And it's associated with the use of the ability of phosphorus in soil by plant. So at high cation exchange capacity, plants have more access to phosphorus in soil than at low cation exchange capacity. So there's really a link between fertilizer and soil characteristics. So then we look at the effect of soil pH. So existing literature point out that take place in Zambia point out about a threshold in terms of pH for maize growth. So it indicates that below 5.5 in pH, fertilizer is less efficient, so their growth response is lower. And at higher pH than 5.5, the effect is higher. So we found that none of the fertilizer improved seed had an effect on deforestation, while at a higher pH, there was the same relationship that I showed in the earlier table. So the role of fertilizer, the interaction of fertilizer and cation exchange capacity is quite important. So one of the significant difference that we identified is also in maize yield. So in area of lower pH, the maize yield is significantly different from the production at higher pH. Then we use the same model and compared scenarios of what would happen if no input would be applied. These are just simple scenarios to see where it's going on in terms of predicting forest cover loss. So we looked at what's the prediction with the current application rate for seed and fertilizer. What if people would use the recommended application rate for both of these inputs? What about if people would not use fertilizer, just the same amount of seed they are using now? And what about if they use no fertilizer but recommended seed? Well, definitely there's a big difference in terms of its predicted forest cover loss. With no inputs, it's the higher deforestation. And what we see is that fertilizer, the role of fertilizer is complex, but it doesn't seem to contribute fully to reducing forest cover loss. So what we can bring out from these results is definitely that without input, that would mean more deforestation. So definitely those inputs are useful right now to hold deforestation. Other result is that there's a very strong and consistent relationship between the use of improved seed and reduced deforestation. And the relationship with fertilizer and deforestation is more complex. So definitely there is some implication of soil characteristic, but if we just look uniquely at fertilizer, it would have a positive association with deforestation. When it's used with seed, it contributes to reduce forest cover loss. So this is the research that has been done that shows a little bit, okay, what can we do to address drivers of deforestation in agriculture? So we're trying to really build evidence. So here definitely there's a really strong evidence that using this highly spatially disaggregated information, the use of improved seed is important to and is associated to reduce deforestation. So now we are also interested about wood energy. What is the role of wood energy in deforestation? So if we look at documents from the government, Zambia has been involved in trying to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. A lot of the drivers that are identified, even if like they see deforestation as quite key, a lot of the work that is putting in place is to address the contribution of wood fuel, including charcoal, and to adopt alternative energy sources in order to tackle deforestation. So we are looking at evidence of what can actually address deforestation. So here is the energy supply for Zambia. Imagine this was not Zambia and this was the US. Wow, the US would have achieved something great because no more fossil fuel use, mostly from renewable sources. So when you look at this, one of the things you see is that definitely Zambia is not dependent on fossil fuel. It's dependent of an energy source that might be sustainable if it's well managed. But it's a very big share of the energy that Zambia uses, so it's so important for livelihood. So we need to keep that in mind. So charcoal, for those who are not so familiar with Zambia, is produced in rural area. People, they will produce charcoal by cutting the trees, stacking it in a kiln and cover it with soil, about a foot of soil, and then they would light it and it will burn for about a week in low oxygen, and it will provide this like nice charcoal that's easily carried to the urban areas. So one of the questions that we're looking at in terms of drivers, we're interested to see, is the charcoal, like when land is cleared for agriculture, there's two options. People can burn the trees and plant. People can also decide to use the trees and produce charcoal. So if it's that case, there's no additional emission because people would have cut for agriculture. So agriculture is the main driver. If charcoal is produced per se, so if it's the forest is cleared for energy, then you have degradation. You have an additional contribution of charcoal to emissions and to forest degradation. So we're trying to see which one of those is the most important with this research. And we're doing this by building evidence from different data sources. One of this is by using national vegetation survey data that was done by the government. There's like 2 national vegetation survey data that we were able to use to look at the biomass change of charcoal preferred trees, and also there's their distribution. Then we also went to do a field study in a hotspot production area. And the next step that we're working on is to develop a remote sensing approach to monitor charcoal and scale it up. So the inventory, there was this, is the sampling design. It was covering the whole Zambia, and the vegetation was measured in those plots and remeasured about 7 years afterwards. So there's a measurement difference, and we use that to look at biomass difference in some charcoal preferred trees. And what we find nationally is a decline in these three very important charcoal preferred species. So there's definitely a decline in biomass for those species that are preferred for charcoal between the first inventory and the second inventory. Then we have we also modeled species distribution of trees that are important for charcoal and those that are not used for charcoal at all. And when we look at it, we see that the trees that are used for charcoal, key variables of importance that explain their distribution is, one of them is the distance to road. So as trees that are preferred to charcoal closer to road, they are disappearing. So there is an effect on the tree distribution nationwide. So this is, and this is pretty much unique for trees that are really taken for making charcoal. So this is one impact. Then we went to this study area that is about 3 hours from Lusaka, and we established field site with a team for an area of about 400,000 hectares. in different land tenure and protection status area, so in forest area and game management area, in farm blocks, on customary land. And we measured the impact on trees, what's the trees that are taken for charcoal, and also interviewed farmers to know more about the production. So definitely in customary land, we saw a lot of the big kilns, like enormous kilns. They produce, I could not believe it at first, but it's very large, and they are producing it. It's, in this case in particular, it's in uncustomary land. The owner wants to do commercial farming. There's people that produce charcoal. So the landowner benefits from having the trees removed, and those other people, they produce charcoal as their source of income. So, so really the driver is agriculture in this situation. So then we compare from the data set that we have, and we visited 140 sites and interviewed 50 producers, and also looking at just around the type of production that's made. And clearly we find a statistical relationship between the type of driver and the type of land tenure or protection status. So in forest reserve, where agriculture is prohibited, charcoal is the main driver. Nobody's gonna farm. They come, they make charcoal and leave. So it's contributing in forestry reserve to additional emissions from degradation. So we quantified the carbon loss of about 50%. So these are the species that are the most used in that area. Normally the site of the kilns has average about half an hectare, but it goes between a small area to 2 hectares. So it's quite small. So it's a challenge to be able to identify it with remote sensing. And on the sites, definitely we find a lot of woody debris that can really increase the intensity of fire in those sites. So we also learn a lot from producers we talked to. And so most of the producers were new to the charcoal business. The 80% do it mostly off-season, so outside the time when they are actively cultivating. And they can produce 2 kilns per year on average, but there's a lot of variation in the kiln size. And for most of them, it's an opportunity to bring money for the family and invest on the farm. So people will sell to buyers near the field site, or go all the way to Lusaka to sell to the capital to sell the charcoal. So let me compare a little bit, like from my friend Humphrey, who has a 3-hectare farm, and what he got in terms of maize. So he told me all the costs that he has on his farm and all that he invested. And when he calculated it, he found that his net benefit was quite low. Then when we compare to a kind of average amount of what the producer were telling us in terms of cost and fees that they would need to pay for charcoal and what they would get, well, they can make actually a decent amount of money compared to what they get for maize. But it's important to understand that maize is also playing an important role for food. So it's feeding people, it's not just for sale. So it has another important role. So here is pretty much the next step that's going to be started soon for using high resolution remote sensing to detect the site. So the first image is 1 year before we went to the field. So you see in the red circle that it's still forested. Then the year after, it's cleared. So we can see the impact, but it's still difficult. It's still a remote sensing challenge. So one of the findings is definitely there's a net decline in biomass for charcoal preferred species over the country. Charcoal is mostly a byproduct of deforestation for agriculture on customary land. It's a major cause of degradation in forest reserves that are not very well enforced in terms of environmental protection. There's also a direct impact on carbon stock and tree diversity. And definitely we see more producers getting into the business. So generally from this work, one evidence is that the role of improved seeds and reduced deforestation. So in terms of driver, this is some quite hopeful idea to really be able to harmonize, increase food security and reducing pressure on forests. And so another important finding is really the link between agriculture and charcoal production, which they cannot, with the future research, I will look more into it, but I hope you've seen that there's a lot of link. They are very linked. The deforestation from agriculture and for energy. So the link between energy and agriculture is really there. And without disentangling this link, it's going to be hard to know how much wood energy is really contributing to deforestation. So thank you. I can take some questions. Yes?
I love your analysis on the relationship between those practices and ecological outcomes. What sorts of information do you have on the drivers of those practices in terms of what kind of a livelihood strategy that is? Whether that's farmers who are sort of right at the margin and are really struggling, or whether that's farmers who are not.
When you say practices, what are you referring to?
Like the use of the fertilizer and the use of the improved seeds, for example.
Well, it's really working with the colleague in Zambia that work in agriculture. They are both involved in the agriculture survey that we use. So these nationally representative survey. So definitely, this data include different livelihood strategy. So, the work is really based on the research and also time that people have spent in the field to understand the practices of farmers. So those surveys are really quite comprehensive. As I was saying, like the enumerator spends 6 to 7 hours to try to, get to the bottom of it. Yeah. Yes?
What do you expect to see 20 years from now? In what sense are forests in Zambia sustainable?
What's the last?
In what sense are forests in Zambia sustainable?
I think right now the management is not sustainable because there's no management. I expect much less forest cover than now. Hopefully, the impact will raise some awareness about the importance that it has because, for example, the recent research that I mentioned about deforestation and the water cycle is new, is showing people, and I think that people in the field, they know that when there's deforestation, it's more hot, it's more dry. So but can we prevent this? I mean, can we be smart enough to find ways to really conserve forests, manage it sustainably? Yes, it's an open question.
You know, any current policies or laws from the Ministry of Land and Forestry Department in terms of utilization of charcoal, also preservation of biodiversity within these forest lands, and what penalties are going to be put on people who would utilize illegally, most of this charcoal?
Well, I think for charcoal, right now, charcoal, there's a lot of big projects that are starting, but sometimes I'm questioning their assumptions. So, for example, there's this big USAID call for $30 million for alternative to charcoal. And it's put in a frame that by providing alternative charcoal, we will reduce deforestation. So I think that, I think we need more proof of that really if we address charcoal, that forests will remain there. I'm not sure. Because I'm not sure if charcoal is actually driving all this. So that's why it's quite important. And if you start on assumptions, the likelihood of success is limited. So right now, in terms of enforcement, there's very limited enforcement. People see that there's some issue, but I think for sustainable management, there's many ways, that there's many options and ways to go to have a more sustainable energy portfolio. And I think wood energy is part of it. It's not just bad. It's part of it, and it's a crucial part of livelihood for people also. Yes?
Yeah, thank you, Johanne, for the presentation. I was wondering if you could speak to the problem of using the term deforestation, because in popular phraseology, it's kind of a binary term, right? Forested or deforested. When in fact, you had one slide where you had degraded forest reserve versus deforested agricultural land. And so that the data that comes into you to assemble your geospatial work may say something is deforested when in fact it's not after 5 years. Can you address that and how you approach that?
Definitely. Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's an important nuance. The definition is very important in the Climate Change Convention, where it has been very clearly defined that deforestation is the permanent conversion from forest to other land use. So in this case, converting to agriculture is a permanent conversion if it's not shifting cultivation. So for charcoal in forest reserve, it's degradation because we expect that forests could regrow if left untouched. But when it's under agriculture, forests will not regrow. So I think that's also one key point that I forgot to mention. In the analysis of the sustainability of charcoal or not, it's forgotten often that land that's not under forest land is land that's converted to agriculture is land that's there's no more forest to extract for wood energy. So definitely you cannot produce any more wood energy when it's converted to agriculture. So you need to produce it elsewhere, or there needs to be other energy sources. I don't know if it answers your question. Yes.
I'm thinking I may know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You worked with the Ministry of Lands and the Forest Department. There's an interest on the part of the Ministry of Agriculture and in policies related to this, and ministries that attend more to livelihoods and in family well-being and nutrition. How is there any connection at all among the major government ministries that have a stake in this?
No, I think that unfortunately not. There's not enough interaction because definitely to address the main drivers of deforestation, it's in the agricultural sector that we're going to find solution, not inside the forestry department. So in terms of finding solution to the problem, not just identifying it, there needs to be more interactions. And right now, most of the focus of in agriculture is to improve rural income and improve food security. So these are the objectives. And in their strategy to reduce emissions from deforestation, in their national strategy, one of the strategic objectives in agriculture is to adopt better agricultural practices that reduce emissions. So it's very vague. It's very vague. But there's not a lot of empirical evidence. We can't blame them, really. Like, we really need to bring more evidence to the table of what works, what doesn't work. So, yeah, I think as in scientists, we have a job to do. Yes?
If deforestation continues, what would be the social impacts of it in terms of would people be forced to migrate internally or maybe transnationally? Like what would be the social implications of deforestation?
Yeah, well, already there's internal migration in Zambia. People in the southern province where it's becoming more hot and where there's more droughts, they are in the game management area. All the people there were Tonga, were all migrating from southern province. So it's already happening, and they need more land, they need food. So they are looking for places, but as we know, there's a limit at some point to migration and to the forest. Yeah.
Oh yes. Hi. Hi. Great. I love looking at my country from this angle. I'm a farmer back home in Ghana. And my question is sort of related to yields, because it's what we do for life. We eat maize, people burn charcoal. So social, economic impacts in the coming years. We have experienced the drought in the southern side of it, which I have heard in your answer. But we're now moving, and there's this part that still has things under control. And of course, if I got new land today, I'm obviously going to chop off most of the trees so that I grow my plants. So I don't know the relationship between the different major stakeholders to help us and get more aware of what we are doing to our land and to the environment generally. I don't know if your research is related to helping the farmers understand, or yours is just to research and give people the data to implement.
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. Well, the first part of the research is really what I think is a big lesson is the strong relationship between the use of improved maize seed and reduced deforestation. So right now a lot of attention is given to fertilizer, to intensify agriculture. But then in this research we find that definitely the role of seed is more important to reduce deforestation. So using improved maize seed seems like a logical way to improve food security for farmers and reduce deforestation. So definitely, as you said, people need land, they need to eat, they need to have a livelihood activity. And so I think it's a very much, from what I see, a win-win in terms of food security and reducing pressure on forests than using improved maize seeds if we find these results.
By improved maize seed, can you be more clear on that?
Improved maize seeds are usually hybrid maize seeds that are better at producing, so they will give good outcome from the agricultural field. So when you plant the seeds, you get more output from your land.
Okay, I think we need to end because people have other classes, so let's give Johanne a minute.